Yes, you are.
Yes, Lakshmi. You can
Okay,
start.
thank you. A very warm good morning and a heartily welcome to one and all. Myself Lakshmi from 3rd DC Mathematics. It gives me immense pleasure to extend to you a very warm welcome on behalf of St. Joseph's College, Irinjalakuda, who has clapped all of us for the webinar on intellectual property rights in association with IQAC and Academic Excellence Committee. Before starting the program, I hope everyone here are doing well and staying safe, and anyone in difficulty gets well soon. Now, let us start the program with a short silent prayer. Thank you. Now, I welcome Anna Davis of 3rd DC Mathematics for the welcome speech.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, Anna.
The capacity to learn is a gift. The ability to learn is a skill. But the willingness to learn is a choice. Respected principal, vice principals, the guest of honor, Dr. Leon, teachers, and all my dear colleagues, I wish you all a lovely morning and a hearty welcome. Myself, Anna, from 3rd DC Mathematics, is extremely privileged and honored to be given this opportunity to welcome you all to today's webinar on the topic Intellectual Property Rights. Moving on to my duty, I welcome Dr. Sister Asha Teres, our dear principal, to this webinar. Welcome, sister. Next, I would like to welcome our vice principals, Dr. Sister Eliza and Sister Blessy, to the gathering. Welcome, sisters. Now, on behalf of our college, I welcome our resource person, Dr. Leon Itiachin, Professor in Biotechnology at Sahradaya College of Engineering and Technology, Kodagara. Aside from being a lecturer in Sahradaya, he also works as an adjunct professor in Manipal Institute of Technology, MIT, Karnataka. He have been a research coordinator at Kingfra Park, Karate from 2008 to 2014 and a risk analyst at London in 2008. He worked as the principal investigator in 5 projects sponsored by KSCSTE, the Institute of Engineers, and UNAT. Currently, he is guiding 3 doctoral students in biopreservative, Ayurvedic medicines, and nanopackaging. Dr. Leon is also famed for his work as a senior production engineer at EDL Brewers and as a junior engineer at MP Sugars and Chemicals Limited at Andhra Pradesh. He is also known for his various publications in international journals and articles. Above all, he is a wonderful teacher and a dedicated mentor adored by his pupils. Without further ado, I welcome Dr. Leon to this gathering. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Anna.
Next, I extend a hearty welcome to all our dear teachers, without whom this day wouldn't be a success. Welcome, teachers. Lastly, I welcome all my dear colleagues and friends who are here with us today. Once again, welcoming you all, I conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Now, I welcome the guest of honor, Dr. Leon, for taking the webinar. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Lakshmi. Thank you all for having me on this webinar. I spoke to Alfie Madam and some time back, a few days back, and she said this is one of the requirements as per the UGC, and I've got the syllabus in front of me. Okay, what I'm going to do, as I told her, it's quite difficult to complete this entire thing in 2 hours. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to discuss a bit about IPR, what's the relevance of it. I'm going to do nearly all of module 1, and then I'm going to discuss the 7 types of IPR that are mandated by TRIPS, which covers the rest. Going into each of them in detail, we may not have enough time for that, but we will definitely go through all 7 of them briefly. Okay, is it audible and clear? You can see the slides, no?
Yes, sir, no problem as such.
Okay. Okay, so this is how I'm going to break up the talk for over the next 2 hours. What I'm planning to do is probably stop after about 50 minutes, take a 10-minute break, and then we'd start for the second hour. Okay, so the initial thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to discuss why, what is the importance of IPR. As an audit course, you must, the first thing that asks, why am I studying this? As I think one of y'all was a mathematics student. I don't know your other branches, but what is the relevance for this? How does it connect with you? And I think this is essential for every subject that you learn. How does it connect with your day-to-day life? How is it going to help you? So we're going to briefly discuss why this is important. We are then going to look at what is the knowledge revolution, what is the consequences of the knowledge revolution, and what is something known as the knowledge economy, and how this has shifted into the importance of IPR today. We would then look at how there are two very important treaties. One is the WIPO and one is the WTO. How these two treaties, what is the basis of their founding? Okay. And the lastly, we will look through the 7 types of IPRs that are mandated. Okay. At any time, you can stop me. Okay, remember, you can ask me a question if you have a doubt. To make the most out of these webinar sessions is for you to get interactive. Okay, and there is no harm in asking or stopping me at any time and getting something a little clearer. I'll try my best to do that, but do make it a point to try to break in whenever you feel like it. Okay. This is something that I tell all my students is it's essentially important for us to know the why of why we do things. Okay. Now, as you say, most of the time what happens is, you know what you are doing. Okay. So let's say you're doing BSc Mathematics. That's what I'm doing, sir. Well, I'm doing this. This is the course I'm doing. How do you get there? How do you get your BSc Mathematics, sir? I have 6 semesters. I write 50 exams. I have internal assessments. I clear that and I would get my degree. Now, the important thing is, why do you do it? Why have you taken this? What's the purpose of this? Which is what drives everything. Now, when you study any subject, if you don't know the why of it, everything else becomes irrelevant. And the problem is, most of the time, we don't know why we are studying subjects or why we are doing something. And what happens if you look at the bottom diagram, you see a weaker influence. Because if you don't know what is the importance or why this subject is important, what happens? You don't really study it. You study it to finish an audit course. It's a requirement by Calicut University, so we do it. But it doesn't really influence you. But if you understand why this is important, why obviously there are some important people in Calicut University that decided that this is so important that a mathematics student has to do it as part of an audit course. So obviously there's been some thought
Excuse me,
into
sir.
it. Yes.
Sir, all streams of students are there. All the degree students are there.
Okay, all streams. Okay. So all of y'all, there's obviously some importance for this that Calicut University thinks it's important for you to take it up. So we are going to look at why this is important, and that more or less covers most of the module 1. Okay. Now, to know why IPR is important, we have to know what is the knowledge revolution. Okay. This is a term that you may have heard a lot. There is something known as the knowledge revolution, and I'll try to explain what it is. Okay. So the knowledge revolution is something that means that there is a great value for knowledge today. Okay. Now, to give a simple analogy that I often do is, now suppose if you look at history, or if you look at, cultural history or, mythology, there was this option of, when Sita needed to find a husband, what did they do? They left this huge arrow, and whoever could pick it up could marry Sita. Ram did. If you look at King Arthur, he had to pull out this sword this tight sword out of a huge rock, and he became the King of England. If you look at, Alfonso, the King of Spain, what happened is the person who won the horse race married Maria. Okay. So what we look at, when we look at history, we see that it was a time in which being strong and brawny was most important. Now that at some stage in your life, when you get married, do you think your father would put a huge rock in front of your house and says, whoever picks up this rock can marry my wife, my daughter? No, this would not be the thing. The first thing a prospective father asks a groom for his daughter is, what have you studied? And this simple analogy looks at the importance of knowledge today. So from how it was 1,000 years back or even 500 years back, where knowledge was not important, knowledge seems to be the defining factor of how we perceive others. How smart is he? It's more important than how strong he is. Okay, so there is obviously a huge value for knowledge today, and this has affected us in three ways. And we will go through these three: societal changes, economic changes, and educational changes very briefly. Okay, so societal changes. Now, what has happened is today, if you look at about 100 years back, the percentage of women working all over the world was hardly 1%. Okay, today when we look in a state like Kerala, it's more or less 40 to 50%. A woman working is not something that's not seen. But 100 years back, this was hardly 1%. The number of women working were very limited, because it just happened that those times brawn was extremely important in most working forces. But today, with knowledge being a redeeming factor, there is, as much as possible, a close equal opportunity for both genders. Okay, and this is because of the value of knowledge today. Okay, 100 years back, this was not the same. Okay, so knowledge has affected the way society works. We look at working ratios. Things like online relationships. 25 to 30% of online relationships now start on an online basis, especially in the US. Okay, the importance of social networks in your life. As youngsters, the new millennials, what someone has eaten based on their Instagram post or their Facebook post or their Twitter feed. These were all things that were not there. And all these are based out of a knowledge society. Okay, knowledge has affected education. The fact that we could have this seated at two different, areas shows the importance of, the internet. If you're looking at the value of knowledge, in the 15th century, if you were someone who was extremely knowledgeable, what you would do is you would by heart the Bible, or you would by heart the Quran. Okay, and what you would do is you would by heart the Bible, and you'll go to every village, and in every village, the village president or the village head would welcome you with open arms, give you a house, a place to stay, give you food, and in the evening, you would start reciting from the Bible, which you by hearted, to everyone who was seated in front of you. Something like this. Give a lecture on the Bible. Why? Because the Bible, the printing press had not been invented, and there were very few copies of the Bible which people by hearted and went around. But with the Gutenberg press and the first printing press, people started getting copies of the Bible. So you could buy a copy. Today, that's not required. You could have the entire Bible on your mobile, so you don't need it. Today, if someone by-hearted the Bible, you would think he's crazy. Okay, and this shows you the shift in how knowledge is being perceived today. The very concept of by-hearting is limited because you have access to all knowledge banks on your phone. When I did my master's, and I keep saying I'm a BG engineer, meaning before Google engineer. There was no access to, papers. We had to go to libraries to actually read. Okay. So if you needed a research paper, I wouldn't think twice of taking a train, going to the Indian Institute of Science from Bombay, just to get a paper, a research paper. Today, you don't have access. Sitting in your room on your bed, you can access every journal in the world and get every paper immediately. So the importance of by-hearting is not there. But the application has changed. We're not going to go into this because this is really not what we are here for, but it shows you how the knowledge revolution has changed your thinking and your education systems. Okay, The third thing, and this is what is important, we looked at societal change, we looked at educational change, and the third thing is how knowledge has changed the economy. Okay, and here I've got this thing. If you can look at it, you could see we had the agricultural age, and in the agricultural age, which was about 2000 years back, for what was most important, people who had land were considered extremely wealthy. And to make money, you needed land, you needed labor, people to mow your fields, and capital was limited. So labor and land was the most important thing. In fact, a very interesting thing is in Versailles, we all have lawns in front of our houses. I hope you know the importance of a lawn. So the first person who put a lawn was King Louis in Versailles in Paris. And so when you had to enter here the palace, you had acres of just plain lawn. And this was a sign of status, meaning I have so much land, I don't have to do agriculture on it. I can just put some useless grass and show people how much land I have. Okay, and that is the basis of why we have lawns in front of our houses. You may not know, but this is the basis. It was a way to show that, I have so much land that I don't need to cultivate food on this land. I can just leave it barren. Okay. After the agricultural age, we had the industrial age from the 18th century, when you had the first motorized or conveyor belts. And what we realized is now land was not that important. You didn't need to have, thousands of acres. You needed a certain amount of land was needed. You still needed labor, but the knowledge of the people was very limited. In the industrial age, they didn't need to have any knowledge. You just needed people. In the industrial age, knowledge had to be a little more. You probably needed an 8th standard or, a 10th standard pass, so you could work machinery. But the important thing was you needed a lot of money to make up these huge complexes. It could be a motor company, it could be a Detroit motor company, it could be a oil refinery. So a huge amount of money was there to set it up. Land, not much, but knowledge once again was limited. And today we have something known as the knowledge economy. And the knowledge economy encompasses companies such as, let's say, Infosys, Google, Facebook, where the most important thing is the knowledge of the people, how smart they are. And that is what drives the entire company. So once you need the least amount of land compared to all three, Infosys the Infosys company that makes, crores and crores of money, they've just got small campuses. Number of labor is much less. You don't need 10,000, 100,000 people, much less comparatively to the other ages. Capital is, more than agricultural land, but much less than the old industrial age companies. But there is a huge benefit of knowledge. Okay. And the important thing about the knowledge economy is that the pace of innovation is very high. To put things in perspective, for 2000 years, can you hear me? Is the rain interrupting? I don't have earphones.
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
It's clear, no?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the change that has happened is if you are looking at, if you're going to look at the fastest means of traveling for 2000 years before the time of Christ till, the late 18th century, that is, you're looking at 1880, 1890, was by horse. You had a carriage and then the horse generated your speed. The first car was invented by Henry Ford in 1903. Wilbur Wright was the first person who flew an aircraft in 1906. Okay. 66 years from the date of flying the first aircraft for hardly 30 meters, we reached the moon in 1969. 66 years. For 2000 years, the only thing we used was horses. But from the date we first flew, 66 years, we reached the moon. So what it shows is because of the knowledge economy, the change and pace of innovation is much faster. As I said, in 95, when 95, 96, there was no Google when I was doing engineering. Today, Google has become such a part of our lives. It's totally changed the way we look at things. Okay, the way mobiles have become part of our lives. All this is because of something known as the knowledge economy. Okay. So once again, to go back, the knowledge economy is very, very important in our day-to-day lives today. Okay. So I'm not going to go this. This is what I was telling you. And so the difference between knowledge as compared to other economies is other assets are tangible. That means you can actually see. So if you buy a piece of land, what do you see? The minute you buy a piece of land, you mark the boundaries, you build a wall, and that land is yours. So it's tangible. Tangible means you can go and feel it, see it, touch it. That is your land. Okay. And what happens is once you have a piece of land, a property, you can decide to give half of it, you can sell it, you can lease it out, you can give half of it to your son. There is a lot of values or rights associated with property. Okay. Now the problem with knowledge as an economy, you can't really, it's very difficult to calibrate knowledge or ideas. Okay. So if you have an idea, it's so difficult for an idea to be tangible. It is non-tangible. Clear? It means that you cannot really touch it. It's an idea. So ideas can spread and it's very difficult to hold it together. So the word intellectual property rights means intellectual, an idea or knowledge that you have, you use it to convert it into the rights that a piece of property has. So IPR means intellectual property rights are various means in which your ideas can be used in the same way as a piece of land. Okay. Module 1 says tangible and non-tangible. Tangible things are like properties, all these are tangible, but your ideas are non-tangible. And as we saw, the knowledge economy looks at the importance of ideas and knowledge. What it is important for us is to convert these knowledge into IPRs, okay, which can be used, okay. And the IPRs that we have, we follow 7 IPRs that allow us to convert our intellectual ideas into having the same value as a piece of land. Okay, in short, that is what an IPR is, okay. So here it just shows you how the shift has been. The blue one shows you the knowledge-based economies. 60s, you see hardly any knowledge-based economies. Today, if you look at 2021, I think all of them are knowledge-based economies. Okay. Once again, a shift of the knowledge from the Industrial Revolution. Okay. So what the knowledge rather than the emphasis on co-means of production. Okay. Okay. So that was, I will briefly tell you what was vertical one. We looked at the importance of the knowledge economy, why it is important for us. We looked at various areas which it was there. And then what we looked at, we realized that the only way when you have a piece of land, a property, there are various rights that are associated with it. That is, you can sell that land to someone, you can lease it out to someone. There is a boundary, you know exactly where it starts, where it ends. Okay, you can build a boundary to make it high, a high wall or a low wall. You can decide when you die, it goes to your son, to your daughter, whoever it is. So there are various rights associated with property. Now, in the knowledge economy, we saw the value of the knowledge economy. What we realized is ideas also have value. There is huge value. But the problem is, how do you sell an idea? You know, we know that there's a value for it. Unlike a property, it was difficult to sell. So what we decided is we started making various IPRs, intellectual property rights, such as patents, copyrights, trademarks, geographical indicators, trade secrets. 7 types of IPRs are mandated by the TRIPS agreement. And what they did is, around the world, they ensured that your knowledge or your ideas could have the same value as a piece of land. Okay, so that in brief is why we study IPR. Okay, today the next part we are going to look at why is it suddenly become important. Okay, IPRs per se are not new. You know, it is not something that started 10 days back or 10 years back. IPR started from the 1880s. So IPRs are very old. Okay, IPRs, and if some of you all are making notes, there are two big organizations that look after IPRs today. One is the WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization, and the second one is the WTO. Okay, these are the two organizations that look after IPRs in the world today. Okay, I'm going to explain to you how these two organizations came about and what is the relevance of them today. Okay, so as I was saying, we will go back to looking at what property are. So what is the use as a bundle of rights? As I said, use, exclude, alienate. Can ideas constitute property? So this is something that even Aristotle said, ideas belong to the state. Okay, why? Because the only reason you have ideas is because the state, Roman state, prevents, make sure that you are safe. No one is going to invade Rome. So because you have free time, you're not worried about someone killing you or stealing, things like that. Because the state keeps you safe, Aristotle was under the impression that any idea that you have is the state's idea. Today you will think that is nutty, but and Aristotle decided that because the state is protecting you, your idea belongs to the state. Okay, now we can have a look, if you're going to look at the importance of ideas as a property, we can look at the Soviet Union. Now you all must have heard of the Cold War, and the Soviet Union, when it was a world power in the 1980s and 1970s, was one of the superpowers. One was the USA and one was the USSR. But in the USSR, they had no access to good electronics. Food was always scarce. There were no TVs, refrigerators. Day-to-day appliances that were so common in the USA was not available in Soviet Union. The only thing that Soviet Union was doing well was it had a great space program, which was comparable to the US, and it had a huge military. Now, why is this? This can be related to IPRs. Now, in the Soviet Union, they didn't have an IPR system. So a person who was very smart, what did he do? He decided, if I wanted to make any money or if I wanted to have a good life, I either had to join the space age, the space agency, or I had to join the, just a minute, I'm going to close the door because this thing is extremely loud. 1 minute. I hope this is better. Alfie, is this clearer?
Yes. Yeah. As such, no problem as such, sir.
The problem
Actually,
is I'm on the top floor, and I think it directly hits the ceiling, so there's a lot of noise. Okay.
Actually, it was
I
not
hope-
disturbing us.
Is it okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'll assume that you can hear me. Okay, so we were speaking about the Soviet Union. So if you are a smart person in the Soviet Union, you decided you either had to study space technology so you could join the space agency, or you had to join the military, because these were the two places where you got money. Okay, so there was no private industry that made TVs, so they didn't want anyone intelligent. So what happened is the intelligent people started moving to these two areas. Okay. And what happened, all other areas, there was no knowledge bank to propel them. Okay. And so while the US was doing well in all fields, making electronics, things like that, the Soviet Union didn't even have basic TVs. Okay. So what we learned from this is one of the reasons that ideas can benefit society is you need to incentivize them. You need to have some benefit for, you've heard of this word startups, you heard of good people trying to get into Infosys or Google because this pays well. So on a personal level, you study to get a job. You want to look at companies that, as you said, are knowledge-based economies. You always hear this. He got into Google, he got into Facebook, he got into, Infosys, TCS. These are all dream companies for students today because these are knowledge-based companies, and the reason these companies exist is because the government has said that, we should have benefit for all these knowledge-based companies. We should follow IPRs. The Soviet Union had no IPRs, and the only two areas that, succeeded was the space as well as the military, and this is where all the intelligent people went. So this is the importance of having or rewarding ideas. Because if you don't reward ideas with IPR, there will be a tendency for research not occurring. If you didn't have a patent system, why would a company want to spend, let's say, 20 million or 30 million on making a new vaccine if they couldn't sell it and make some money? So, today they say that, to make a new breakthrough drug is close to $1 billion US, with 8,000 crores. You get this drug after close to 15 to 20 years. So why should a company spend 8,000 crores over 15 years to make a new drug if the minute they make the drug, someone immediately copies it and sells it at 1/10 the price? So unless you have a strong patent system, companies would not want to invest in any sort of research or R&D. So the patent system, which is one of the IPRs, allows people to look into research and benefiting society. Okay. So IPR serves as a method of rewarding such ventures, So it allows people to think and invest because that whatever idea you have, whatever book you write, things like that are protected by law using these 7 IPRs. Okay. So what is an intellectual property right? It's defined as the rights given to the creations of their mind so that they have the same rights as a piece of land. Hence the word intellectual property rights. Very important for you to understand why this word intellectual property rights. Break it up. Intellectual meaning of your mind, something knowledgeable. Property, what a piece of land is. So an IPR allows ideas of the mind to have the same rights as a property, and hence the word IPR. 7 types. So various knowledges have different ideas. So patent is one type. If you write a book, it is one type. If you have a special symbol, it could be a trademark. So there are 7 types of IPRs that we use to ensure that the knowledge is changed into something that can be used like a piece of property. Okay. So going back to now, we know what is the importance of this. What is important for us to realize is why is IPR suddenly so important? We've heard about the TRIPS agreement, you've heard about the WTO, all this. So I'm going to break it up in a very reasonably easy way for you to look at international agreements. Okay, so initially the entire thing of what you call trademarks, copyrights was there from the 18th century. Okay, the mid 18th century, once we had the Industrial Revolution, people realized that before the Industrial Revolution, or before you had what you call machines doing things, everything was made individually. If you wanted to make, let's say, a horseshoe, you had to go to the the horsesmith or the blacksmith, and he would individually hit it and make it for you. But once the industrial revolution thing, you had a die, and using a factory conveyor belt, you could make thousands of this. So this individual stitching was not there. You didn't go, you could have a factory thing and it could be stitched automatically using a conveyor belt. So this was the industrial revolution. Okay. With this, they realized that a lot of these things are important, you know, having a die, having a machine, all of this had some value. Okay. And this is the beginning of the industrial revolution in the 1880s. At the same time, we were having people like Victor Hugo, Charles Dickens. These are all famous authors. And they were realizing in the 18th century that the books they were writing, you know, every book sold, they were meant to get money, but people were taking their books and pirating it and selling it at the US without them getting any money. So Charles Dickens, Victor Hugo are saying all are, you know, all whatever we've made, whichever book we've written, it is being printed illegally or pirated in the US and we are not getting any money out of it. So all of this came together and they started something known as the Paris Convention or the Paris Treaty, which was the first IPR treaty. And this was in 1883. Okay. With the Paris Treaty, what happened is we had multiple treaties. From the Paris Treaty, we had the Brussels Convention, you know, for trademarks and so on and so forth. And several treaties were there. Okay. In around the 1940s and 50s, each of these treaties, the Brussels Convention, all these treaties were for different areas of IPR. So one was for copyright, one could be for trademarks, one could be for trade secrets. Several treaties were there, and what they decided in the 1950s, I think in the 57, that they would have one organization that would run this entire thing. And that organization was known as the World Intellectual Property Organization. In module 1, it tells you what is the WIPO. So the WIPO was the world, let me just look at this. Okay. So all of this, the Paris, Hague, Madrid agreements, all of these started being run by the WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization. Okay. The WIPO was the basic governing agency. The WIPO is still a governing agency today. Okay. The problem with the WIPO, it doesn't have teeth. And to explain that, I will go to the next slide. Okay. So even though the WIPO was there to organize all sorts of treaties, in the 1980s, the US suddenly saw that things were going wrong. As in, they suddenly realized, now today, if you look at which are the #1 TVs that you use, the names that you have would be LG, Samsung, Sony, Panasonic. These are the TVs that come to mind. Okay. All these TVs were based in Japan and Southeast Asia. Okay. If you look at the 1970s, all the TVs, there were no TV companies in Southeast Asia. All of them were in the US. And Westinghouse, Crown, these were the names of big US TVs that today I don't think any of y'all have heard. These were huge US markets. In the 1980s, the US suddenly started realizing that no one was interested in their TVs. All the TVs people were buying from, Japan and using it in the US. They also started realizing that, people, if you look at cars around you in India, you can look, #1 cars are, let's say, Toyota, Suzuki, Hyundai, Kia. All these are Japanese companies or Southeast Asian companies. The big companies, you saw Ford has left, a US company. General Motors have left, a US company. The US also started realizing this. In the US in the 1980s, the US manufacturing hub known as Detroit started falling. No one wanted Ford cars. Everyone wanted the new cars such as Honda, Toyota. These Mitsubishi became popular in the US. And the US started realizing that while the US was buying a lot of things from Japan, Japan was not buying anything from the US. So there was a trade imbalance. They were buying a lot of things from Japan, but no, Japanese didn't want the US things. So Ronald Reagan realized, what is the US very good at? What does people want from the US? And they realized that the US was most popular for three things. One was it had computers, it had software. It was the beginning of Apple, it was the beginning of Microsoft, IBM. All these were companies that was making software and hardware that was popular around the world. They had something like Michael Jackson, who was a worldwide phenomenon in the 80s. Everyone wanted to listen to Thriller. And they realized that the other area that they were very good was in pharmaceuticals. But the problem they realized was, even though these were US products or made in the US, these ideas were taken to companies or taken to a place like India. You make a new statin, simvastatin drug, it comes to India. India then opens it up, looks at the active component and makes a drug. What the US costs, if a statin tablet in the US costs $10, which is 600 rupees, in India, a statin tablet costs 5 rupees. Even today, if you're going to the US, just taking statin is enough to, a 3-month quota of statin is enough to pay for your ticket. Okay. One of the reasons when you get into immigration in the US, they ask you if you have tablets. And if you take a lot of tablets without a prescription, it is taken by customs. So what we see even today, there's a huge difference. So the US started realizing we are spending millions to make a new drug, but our ideas are being misused. You know, Michael Jackson's music is being pirated, you know, in India, or Microsoft software, which Microsoft has made, is being pirated. When I took, when I was taking IPR in 2005, and I asked in a class, how many of y'all use original Microsoft? No one would put their hand up, not even me, because I never used the original Mac. Today, after TRIPS, after 2005, most computers come with pre-built Microsoft. So now I think the percentage of people who have an original Microsoft version is probably about 70 to 80%. That's a lot from 0%. You know, most computers already have Windows installed. It's part of the cost. Okay. So what we are seeing is, in the 80s, the US was having a problem with piracy. And then the US said, why is there this problem? They said the problem is because of WIPO. So once the US had this problem, the US started an agreement known as the GATT, General Agreement of Trade and Tariffs. So anyone that wanted to trade with the US had to follow this agreement known as GATT. Okay. Now, the funny thing about GATT, India was also a signatory. This was when world trade was opening up. India was a signatory, but the entire GATT was very one-sided treaty. It was made by the US, Canada, United Kingdom, and Australia. So the agreement was written by 3 countries. And what happened, it was very one-sided. So if, from the 1980s, world trade started increasing. So if you look at old Malayalam movies, if someone is coming from Dubai, he gets off the airport, and then from the taxi going home, there would be one TV, one sound system, all on top of the taxi, because these things were not available. Today, no one brings a TV from Dubai, very rarely, because you get everything here. Okay. The concept of world trade has changed. Today, if you go to Lulu, you can buy fruits any season. In our times, 15, 20 years back, you had a mango season, you had an orange season, you have an apple season. Apples from Shimla came at one time, oranges came at another time, mangoes came at another time. Today, you get apples throughout the year. It could be Turkey apples, it could be US Gala apples, it could be Australian apples, it could be green apples. Apples throughout the year are available, not in Lulu, at every supermarket. Oranges are available throughout the year. And this is all the importance of world trade today. So in the 1980s, since Japan was, the US was buying many things from Japan, and Japan wasn't buying things from the US started using the GATT agreement to penalize Japan or India. India was giving a lot of cotton, but India was not taking US products. So they penalized using a clause known as Super 301. And what they did is, if you want to trade with us, unless you trade as much as we trade with you, we are going every product that comes into the US, if it's 100 rupees, we are going to charge 200 rupees duty. So it will cost 300 rupees. So our products will be cheaper. Okay. So this was the problem. So two things were happening. One was the US was realizing that, trade, world trade has opened up so much. And the other countries like India, Japan, Brazil, all were saying this GATT treaty is a useless treaty. We need to have a separate treaty for coordinating world trade. Okay. And so they said, so the US said, why don't we use the United Nations, which was based in New York? And all the other countries said, useless. United Nations is like a US government agency. We need to have a new agency not based in the US. So in 1986, they started work on the WTO, a new agency that would coordinate world trade. Okay. The WTO was this new agency. Okay. And there was a lot of fights from 1986 to 1995. Every country, 9 years it took to get this done. Okay. So as I said, there was a 301 law the US invoked, and there was a need for a new organization. And here you could see the billions that was occurring, sudden hike from, you see, the 1970s, and then you see from 95 onwards, huge hike in world trade. Okay. And so people said we need a new agreement to coordinate trade in the world, and we cannot follow the old US system of GATT. So they said, we are going to start a new agency, and they paved the way for something known as the World Trade Organization. Okay. And they said that. So the US then said, the US in the same time was realizing that their intellectual property, it could be their software, it could be their medicines, it could be their writing, it could be their songs from Michael Jackson. These were all being pirated. So the US said, if you want us to join the WTO, we need to coordinate and have IPRs as a central agreement to the WTO. And they proposed a new agreement known as TRIPS. Okay. So clear. We already had the WIPO, but the problem with the WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization, which is, 50, 60 years old, was the WIPO didn't have teeth. And I use this example of at home, what happens is usually you have parents, usually the mother tends to be a lot lenient. You say you don't want to study, mother said, okay, don't study, go sleep, or you're tired. But usually when the father comes and says something, immediately you follow. You tend to be a little more frightened of the father because the father would probably either hit you, ground you, or penalize you in some way. Mothers tend to be a lot more, I'm not being sexist or gender biased, but these are how most families work. Okay. And what we say is the WIPO was it's like a mother agency. It will not penalize you. Whatever you do, it's okay. Okay. We're not going to penalize you, nothing. And what happened, because it was so lenient, you tend to misuse it. And so even though WIPO was already there, it didn't have teeth. It couldn't penalize a country for, pirating software. There was no teeth in the WIPO organization. So the US said, see, WIPO is not helping. All our stuff is being taken by, India is making our drugs at much cheaper rate. All our music is being pirated. Our software is being pirated. So many things are happening and WIPO can't control. So they said, if the WTO is to be formed, we need to incorporate intellectual property rights in that. And we are going to make a new agreement known as TRIPS. TRIPS stands for Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights. And they said, if you want us to join the WTO, you have to agree to sign TRIPS. India said no. Brazil said no. Whereas US, Australia, UK, all these countries said no, TRIPS is compulsory. This took 9 years. Reason being, why didn't we say no, TRIPS shouldn't be signed? because countries like India, one of the rates our pharmaceutical drugs were so low is because we were very good at making generics. So a lot of countries were not interested in TRIPS. But, I don't know, when you were small, if you're playing cricket in a colony, the boy or girl who owns the bat, he decides when the game starts, when it ends, because it's his bat. If you tell him he's out and he says he's not out, he'll say, okay, fine, you're not out, you bat again, because it's his bat. Because if he's angry, he takes the bat and ball, there is no game. Okay, so US started acting like this young boy with the bat. Because if you don't listen to him, he will take the bat and nothing will happen. Because even then, as it is today, most of the world trade occurs with the US. The US is the world's largest trading country. Everyone wants to trade with the US. Okay, and so the US at that stage in the 1980s and 1990s most trade was occurring with the US. So the US had the cricket bat. If the US is not joining the WTA, there was no basis of the WTA. The WTA didn't make any sense. It's like 10 of you all standing, but you can't play a game because the boy who owns the bat and ball doesn't want to play. He is at home with his mother because he's not coming out. So the TRIPS was forced upon all the other countries to join the WTO. So what did India get, or what did the other developing countries? What they had is, unlike the WTO, unlike the GATT, the WTO was not a one-sided penalty. Okay, so penalizing was done throughout. There was a separate redressal mechanism in the WTO. It was based in Switzerland. Things like that formed. Okay, I'll just take a little bit about WTO and then I'll take a short break. So then the WTO was finally found. It took close to 9 years. In 1995, it was based in Geneva. Okay, so in 2018, this is an own slide now. I think there's about 172 countries have all joined the WTO. Okay, because as I said, trade has become so important today. Okay, and because of this, all these countries joined the WTO. And as to join the WTO, you had to sign this new agreement known as TRIPS. So there were two agreements. One was the TRIPS and one was GATT. Okay, we will look at this, the next slide, I think. Yeah. So to join the WTO, there were three agreements that everyone had to sign. The GATT agreement, which is slightly different from the initial GATT agreement of the US. It was made more uniform and allowed trade. General Agreement of Trade and Tariffs. The second one was General Agreement on Trade and Services. So IT services, outsourcing, things like that was not actual goods. Okay. So, and the third one was TRIPS. So to join WTO, you had to sign these three agreements: GATT, GATS, and TRIPS. So clear? So I'm just going to briefly run through this before we stop. International agreements were always there. We had, from the Hague, from the Paris Convention, the Madrid, as well as the Hague Convention. There were a lot of IPRs from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. But unfortunately, all of this initial conventions then came under the control of an organization known as the World Intellectual Property Organization. Okay, which is it's still functioning today. It's the mother agency of what do you call intellectual property rights. So it's like the mother. It gave birth to intellectual property rights and controls it. Unfortunately, it is not very strict. It cannot impose sanctions for people not following the various conventions. So with the sudden booming of the world trade, the world decided a new organization had to be formed, which was the WTO. The WTO needed, because the US realized people only wanted intellectual things, the computer software, the medical research, the copyright, the music. They said TRIPS has to be implemented strictly. Okay, and we want a new agreement. So if anyone wants to join WTO, you need to sign a new agreement known as TRIPS. Okay, and people said no. It took 9 years. Finally, US was the kid with the bat. TRIPS is compulsory. Okay, so from to join the WTO, these three agreements have to be signed. Okay. I'm going to pause for a while. Does anyone have any questions about this? Please feel free. Anything, nothing is stupid. Okay. Any questions at all? Anything at all? I hope some of you all are awake here.
Students, please respond.
Anything you find funny, or anything you want to, I hope you've understood some of this. As I said, I'm not going to get into the agreements because these are normal agreements. It's very important for you to know why these things were formed. What is the reason for having these agreements being formed? Okay, and that is what I try to bring, instead of giving you pages on the WTO, how it was formed. Why was it formed? As I said initially, how and what you can take up anywhere. You should understand the why. The how, you can look at the syllabus and understand what you're doing also, but the why did this come is important. Why the WIPO is considered as a mother agency, and why the WTO was actually formed, and why TRIPS became a part of the WTO. If there's no questions, can I have a short break? And at 11:05, it's 10:58 on my screen.
Can we rejoin by 11:05?
11:05 is enough. Okay.
Okay.
I'll come back by 11:05. Okay. If you have any questions, you're sorry. When we come back, also, if you want questions, think over it. And when we come back, I would give a little time to just read through this, discuss what we spoke this. If you have questions, you can ask me that. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Dear students, please rejoin by sharp 11:05. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, sir.
Sorry, I took a few minutes more. Can I restart?
Yes, sir. It's 11:07.
Okay, so going through before we go into the next portion, which is looking at the types of IPR. Any questions? No questions, no doubts, no observations? Okay, so just briefly look through what we did in the last 1 hour. We discussed, the first thing we discussed is what is the importance of IPR, why we actually study IPR, what is the importance of intellectual property rights, what the word means, how it is important in this knowledge economy, what is the knowledge revolution, what is the knowledge economy, and the knowledge economy pumped up the importance of IPRs. Okay, so that is the first vertical. Why IPRs are essential is what we learned. We looked at the example of the Soviet Union as compared to the US. We looked at, the importance with industry, socially, all of these factors we looked. The second thing is we looked at the evolution of IPR in global trade. Okay, and that we looked at, we realized that IPR started a long time back in the 1880s, but the mother agency which started looking after the Paris Convention, the Hague, Madrid, all of these conventions which looked at various aspects of IPR, whether it is copyright, patent, or trademark, all these various aspects were then being organized or run by one agency known as the World Intellectual Property Organization. Initially, they were run separately, but then they decided to run it together in one agency known as WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization. I gave it as the mother agency for intellectual property rights, because even though it gave birth to the concept of intellectual property right, it still, it was extremely lenient. If people were, copying or pirating things, it would never punish anyone. It was only, it was like a mother, it had only love. Punishing was very difficult. Okay. But with the boom in world trade, it realized in the 1980s that they needed to have one means of controlling and organizing world trade. And they needed to have a new agency known as the World Trade Organization needed to be formed apart from the United Nations. Okay. And the world decided it shouldn't be US based. Let's have it in Switzerland, which is a neutral country. And let's have something so that these sort of fights like Super 301, one-sided fights between countries trading should not be allowed. There should be a resolution mechanism that is fair for everyone. As Indian citizens, we always expect to have a fair treatment when we go to a court of law. Okay. Similarly, the same thing was said about, the World Trade Organization to regulate world trade. Okay. And based on this, they were going to form World Trade Organization. That's when the US realized, because all of our most important things are intellectual property, Google, Facebook, on that time, Microsoft, IBM, these were all things that could be easily copied, because unless you had intellectual property rights that was strictly followed by all these countries, it was going to be a problem. Okay. So going back, is it clear once again?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So going back, what you can see is the WTO was formed, and based on this, 3 agreements had to be signed: GATT, GATS, and TRIPS. Okay. Now, what TRIPS did is, before the TRIPS agreement, copyrights or IPRs around the world were different. Patents were 14 years in some countries, 20 years in some countries, 25 years in some countries. It was not standardized. It was like you have your international units, so kilometer, meter. To standardize it, they needed some way it could be standardized. So before you had gallons being used in one country, liters being used somewhere, you needed to standardize it around the world. So similarly, they needed to standardize intellectual property rights around the world. Okay. So what TRIPS does is it standardizes IPRs into 7 types of IPRs. Okay. 7 types of IPRs. And in the IPR, it's standardized into patents were 20 years across all countries, that were members of WTO, which automatically had to sign the TRIPS agreement. Okay, and the TRIPS agreement has revolutionized IPRs around the world. So the agreement was signed in 2005, and because it was a new agreement, the TRIPS had to be something that was ratified by Parliament. Now, this is important because, see, one day, let's say one government goes and signs the agreement. Okay, let's say one prime minister decides TRIPS is a good thing, goes and signs it, says it is valid, comes back, and then the next government gets elected, and then he says, no, this is a bad agreement, we are not following. So the TRIPS and WTO said, if you want to become a member of the WTO, it has to be mandated by Parliament, meaning not only does the PM or whoever has to sign it, you have to go back and Parliament should say, yes, we accept this agreement. So later on, if the opposition party comes, they cannot say we did not accept. It has to be mandated by Parliament, which shows that all the people of that country have accepted the agreement. Okay. Unlike other agreements, the WTO as well as the TRIPS had to be mandated by Parliament. And TRIPS had certain clauses that had to be followed in all countries. And because these clauses were not there, like we did not have design or we did not have integrated circuit design in India before TRIPS. So India had to make an agreement specially for that. So what the country said is each country will be given a certain amount of time to get all the legislation in place. Okay, so even though we signed in 1995 as a developing country, the developed countries had to start from year 2000. Developing countries like India was given 10 years up to 2005 to follow all the legislation to become TRIPS compliant. Other countries 2010, Sub-Saharan Africa 2015. Okay, but as of now, all countries around the world are TRIPS compliant. That means officially we have all the Parliament acts as well as laws that make us TRIPS compliant, and the basic tenets of the TRIPS agreement is followed in all these WTO countries. Okay. Why is this not moving? Okay. So what TRIPS does, as I said, it recognizes 7 types of IPRs. Okay. So what are these 7 types? Patents, trade secrets, copyrights, trademarks, industrial design, geographical indicators, and integrated circuit design. Okay. So 7 types of IPRs every TRIPS country had to follow. So India didn't have integrated circuit design. We didn't have an Industrial Design Act. Since we've signed TRIPS, this had to be followed. The patent period of 20 years was across the world. India used to have a 14-year patent period before that. Now, patents around the world are 20 years. Okay, before that was not the case. So if by chance you are referring IPR, please make sure the book you're referring is not some 1995 book or 1980 book, because it will say 14 years. It has to be very, very important that when you are studying IPR, make sure that the timeline is clear. It should be a new book, because otherwise it will be invalid. What you're studying will not be valid, because this is a ever changing field. Okay, so basis of TRIPS is it allowed it all to be standardized around the world. Okay, so now we are going to discuss the 7 types of IPRs. Okay, so when we say IPR, you do not say IPR is patent, IPR is copyright. IPR is an umbrella term. Intellectual property rights, patent is one type of IPR. Trademark is one type of IPR. Geographical indicators, one type of IPR. They're all, it's an umbrella term that encompasses all of these. Okay. So there are 7 types. That IPRs can be more than 7, but as per TRIPS mandated, 7 types of IPR have to be followed in all the countries that are members of WTO, which is nearly all the countries in the world. I think 175 or 180 countries have now signed it as of date. You can just go to the WTO website and check how many countries are members of the WTO. Okay. So there are two types. One is two main categories. Sometimes we think as copyrights or unregistered rights, or industrial property and registered rights. So these two are breakup of these seven. Some books will show you as industrial property, because these are all things that are very important for industry, such as patents, trademarks, geographical indicators, and copyright or unregistered rights. So why does it mean unregistered? Because patents, industrial design, you have to go and register it. But copyright, the minute you write a book, it becomes yours. Still, you have an option to go get a copyright taken. But usually when you write a book and you publish it, the copyright automatically becomes yours. Okay. So IPR is a collection of tools. Okay. And you use one tool for a specific thing to ensure that you have maximum benefit from your idea. Okay. Now, how does this work? I'm going to give you the example of calcium sandose. I think a lot of you all have had calcium sandose tablets. Calcium sandose tablets are tablets that it's a calcium supplement. And usually it is in the same, if you go to a shop, it will be in a box of it's like a puppy dog, a white and blue cap. You would have seen these tablets, you would have taken it when you were small. Okay. So how does this use IPR to ensure maximum availability of that product? Now, when calcium supplements were first made by Sandoz, they had a patent. Okay. So what happens if you ask for a calcium supplement? The only one that you would get, the only tablet that you would get would be this one that was made by calcium Sandoz. No other company was manufacturing. So you ask for calcium Sandoz, you ask for a calcium supplement, the pharmaceutical person would say calcium Sandoz is the only one and give it to you. Now, the minute the patent period got over, people would then have, there could be a Pfizer, there could be a lot of other companies that were making calcium supplements. Now, as a buyer, the company wants you to remember your name. So they have a brand. Sandoz is the brand. So if you remember Sandoz, you say, oh, I want calcium Sandoz. That's the company I used to take. Because the pharmacist could say, which company do you want? If you don't remember. So what they've done is they have made an industrial design, which is that dog shape. An industrial design is something that only has looks. It has no value. If you put it in a normal container, the tablet doesn't become better. If you put it in a dog container, it doesn't become better. If you put it in a cat container, it doesn't become. It is only for the looks. Industrial design is for looks. So what they did is they decided that in case you go and they ask which calcium supplement you want, you don't remember the name calcium Sandoz. You will say, no, I want the one with the dog, and so what happens? The customer continues to buy your tablet. So you continue to sell it to a customer to make that amount of money. Okay. Apart from that, inside there could be some instructions or there could be something about the tablet which would be covered by a copyright. So here you see how by using a different set of IPR tools, the company ensures maximum profit. Okay, which is why companies are there for. They are not doing this for charity. They want to incentivize the product so that they could get money to make new products. Okay, so remember, an IPR is a collection of tools like a what do you say, like a hammer, like a screwdriver, like an asterisk screw, whatever, which you have to use according to what product you have. Okay. So you use different tools, various registered and unregistered I gave you. Now we will look at these 7 types. So the first one, if anyone is making, is trademark. Now what is trademark? You all know what is a brand you would decide, okay, I'm only going to wear Nike shoes, and there is a certain value for that brand. Okay, and a trademark. So before, if you're going to, there were places in, I forgot the name. I think it's Lalpat Nagar in Delhi, where you used to get 15 years back, you would get tons of fake Nike, okay, or fake Adidas. Okay, now with the WTO, it's a lot more difficult to sell this. It's you can't sell it on on Amazon, or if you report a fake item on Amazon or Flipkart, it is immediately removed. Okay, so what is the value of this is companies who spend a lot, Nike, spends a lot on research as a company, and that money, it's amazing the amount they spend on research. If you don't know, read Shoe Dog, the story about Nike, how Nike made new shoes that broke the world record for marathon running. So they do a lot of research. And so imagine if some company just makes the thing, puts the swoosh signal, there's a huge loss for the company. So trademarks allow you to brand something, okay? And you need to have an inventive name. You all know Xerox is actually a brand of photostat, but it's become a verb. Xerox is actually the name of company, but it's such a strong brand. You say, will you Xerox this for me? The correct word is, will you photostat? But the brand itself has become a word. It's that strong. Or, hey, let's go Google it. Google is a brand, but now asking something to a computer, the word has become Google. So brands can become so strong that the value of the brand is, huge. So let's say something like Coca-Cola. Now, tomorrow, Coca-Cola decides, okay, we are just going to send the name Coca-Cola with the symbol. Nothing else is going to change. Okay, we are selling that. The brand has a huge value. If you look at it, the brand of Coca-Cola would be about $100,000 billion. That's a huge amount of money for just the brand. Everything else would remain. So brand is something, it's a notional value, but it has a lot of value for it. Okay, so I should have, okay, in any idea, any sign which is distinctive, you have trade names, logos, symbols, you have an R written. R means registered. Sometimes you will have TM. TM means be warned, I have applied for a trademark, I still haven't gotten it. If you put R, it means you have finally got it. You have 10 years, which then you can renew it. Okay, the value of this. Copying not necessary to infringe. That means, suppose you go Infosys and then tomorrow you decide, you look at the trademark registry and you realize that Infosys has only registered for computer software. You then look at it and see clothing, Infosys is not registered. You then say, okay, I'm going to start Infosys jeans. Okay, and you start making jeans and people will say, oh God, this is made by Infosys. If I buy these jeans and wear it for the interview, I'll get into Infosys, because we have co-collaborated the name with something that is in IT, which is very good. And so you say, okay, let's do this. So that is not allowed. Okay, so it just direct copying, or instead of Microsoft, someone made micro hard software and was penalized and fined because he used the same lettering, and he said it's a different word, but it didn't go through in the US. Okay, so there are a lot of examples of this. So here you could see 2018, you could see the value of this in millions. Okay, and you could see the value of Apple is 214,395 million US dollars. Calculating that into 7.5 will give you the value in crores. So this figure into 7.5 will give you the value of the Apple trademark. Huge. So tomorrow Apple says, okay, we are selling Apple, this symbol, and we are going to make it into an orange. This is the value they will expect for just the name Apple, and this, the brand value of that you can sell. Google is so much. So you could see before Coca-Cola was number one, now Apple, Google, all have overtaken it. But you can see the values of these huge values just for access to the symbol. Okay. All these are symbols that you have seen. You have V-Guard, Microsoft, Swoosh, Reliance, Pepsi, Virgin, Kodak. All of these are world famous trademarks that we all know what it's associated with. Okay. So trademarks stimulate. So what is the benefit of trademarks? It ensures that each time you buy something, you know. So suppose you see Lee jeans. Suppose there was nothing like Lee, you would not know, you know, I need Lee Kansas. You know that every time Lee makes that Kansas, it would have the same fit. Everything would be similar to what you have. So it's not like each time you start searching for something, you know that that company has that standard that they follow. And as a consumer, that allows you a certain amount of freedom. It allows you, a strong trademarks allows you not to get cheated by fakes. Imagine you buy 3,000 rupees you spend on a pair of Levi's, and then you come out and find that Levi's is made in Ulhasnagar or somewhere. You know, you feel cheated because, you know, there was no strong trademark. So suppose you buy something from Amazon thinking it's a Nike shoe, you get it and it looks fake. You have no recourse if there is not a strong IPR regime in the country. So that's why now it's difficult to get fake items. Before, I think Snapdeal used to have a lot of fake items, but they've also been, the government has cracked down on them. Amazon and Flipkart, if you get a fake item, they will immediately refund it. Snapdeal has also become a lot stricter now. Okay. Now the second one we are going to is registered design. Okay. Now, as I said, a registered design is something that has no intrinsic value. It is just looks. Okay. So it is not the way something works, which then you would need a patent. So having that look is not giving it any added value. If there is an added value, it will have to go into a patent or some other form. But a normal look is what defines it. You know, so today, apart from the Apple iPhone, nearly every phone looks like that. Or if you look at, let's say, sometime back, I think in the 1990s, every V-Guard stabilizer had a UFO design, which was one of the India's first registered design. Or you have a registered design on, let's say, Dyson vacuum cleaners. You know, the yellow and gray mix is a registered design. Okay, so there is no actual value for it, but it's a looks, shape, pattern, configuration. So technical functional aspects are excluded. It is how something looks, and based on that looks, you want to buy it. So I gave the example of the calcium Sandoz, you know, the box made like a puppy dog. If it is a cat, it's not going to make the tablet better. There is no functional value. It is just the looks, shape, and pattern that draws you towards that product. So these are all some examples of specific looks, shape, patterns that have been followed across registered design, which does not change the way the product works. So having the iMac in a different sort of a box will not make, having it in this box will not make it unless they've specifically said some cooling system or not. But otherwise, there is no value. Okay, so the second one was registered design. The third one is geographical indicators, which you've all heard of. Geographical indicators, examples could be Darjeeling tea that is specially made in Darjeeling, or good example could be Scotch whiskey. Scotch whiskey is whiskey that is made in Scotland using water from Scotland. Okay, so now tomorrow, why is Scotch whiskey have a special taste? Because Scotland, the water goes through several layers of peat or coal. So the water has a smoky taste. So they take water. So the water that percolates down, the groundwater in Scotland has got a specific taste because it's got top layers of peat or coal, which sort of cleans the water and gives it a peaty taste. Okay, and that is used to make champagne, is used to make Scotch whiskey. Now, tomorrow someone says, okay, I'm going to buy 100,000 liters of water from Scotland, bring it to India, and in Kanjipuram, I want to make Scotch whiskey. Just because it's water, it has to be made in that area. Okay, so the minute it's made in Scotland using that thing, it's a Scotch whiskey. You can be an Indian and go and do it. It doesn't mean you have to be a member of Scotland or a Scottish citizen, as long as you're doing it in that. Similarly, Kanjipuram saris are saris that are weaved in Kanjipuram. Okay, there is some value of that weaving process in Kanjipuram. If someone is going to weave it outside, you cannot say Kanjipuram sari. If it is going to be weaved in Benares or Varanasi or Kottayam, it cannot be Kanjipuram sari. Also, if a weaver comes from, let's say, Scotland and learns weaving and does it in Kanjipuram, he can sell it as a Kanjipuram sari, even though he's not a citizen of Kanjipuram. Similarly with champagne. Champagne is wine, sparkling wine made from grapes of the Champagne district in particular. India has a large number of geographical indicators. I think one of the most in the world. We have geographical indicators for, Ambur biryani. We have for Calicut halwa. We have for the, wet grinders from Coimbatore wet grinder. 15 years back, wet grinders were meant to be the best in Coimbatore because the granite rock taken from that area is meant to be good. So you have Coimbatore wet grinders. India has a lot of geographical indicators. Some that you would have heard is Darjeeling tea, Kanjipuram sari, Benares silk. Okay. Yes, some of them that you've all heard of, very similar. Arumala Kannadi, the Pavitram Modram, both from Kerala, shows you that these are so many ones that we use in Kerala and around the country. So India has a lot of geographical indicators. Okay. The fourth one is a very important one in IPRs. It's known as patents. So I think there's a whole module on patents. I'm going to tell you some of the 3 things that are okay. Okay, so for us to, when we look at patents, a patent is something that must have 3 criteria. If you can, please note this down. It's known as the Trifecta of Patenting. For a patent, it needs to be novel, it needs to be non-obvious, and it needs to have industrial applicability. 3 things. Okay, it's known as the Trifecta of Patenting. Okay, so one, it must be novel. Novel means it should not form the state of the art anywhere else. It should not be disclosed. It should not have come in papers. It should be something that is totally new. Okay, so there are various tests to check on novelty. Is it the state of the art? What is the prior art? What has happened before? And what is yours? Is it novel? Okay, the next thing, it should be non-obvious to a person skilled in the art. Okay, very important. It should be non-obvious, but the non-obvious should be measured by a person skilled in the art. Now, suppose you're a microbiologist, okay, and you have been doing, let's say, subculturing of microbes all your life. You know the process of using an autoclave, sterilizing, and the minute you are sure that once the agar is sterilized and you streak it, you're going to get thing because there won't be any contamination. Now, if I, as a chemical engineer, when I first went to a microbiological lab and I was trying to think, I had no idea about the sterilization process. I couldn't do it. I would always get cultures that were contaminated. And then I learned about, autoclaving, sterilization. And then I was realizing, for me, that seems mind-blowing. It's great. But to a microbiologist, that is obvious. So the non-obviousness has to be judged by a person skilled in the art. So suppose you are a person, you are a chemical engineer. Doesn't mean you just need a degree. If you're a chemical engineer and you've been working in IT for 15 years, okay, then you will not be a person skilled in the art in chemical engineering, even though you have a BTech or PhD or so, because for 15 years you've not been in the field. You are not a member of the society of the field. You are not daily associated with the field. So you cannot know what are the new what do you call, the new inventions or new discoveries in the field. So you are not considered a person skilled in the art, even though you have a degree in that field. Okay. So non-obvious means, so another example, the, what do you call it? The non-obvious criteria means it shouldn't be the next obvious step. What do you mean by next obvious step? Now, suppose you make a fridge. Okay. The fridge is, you get a patent for a fridge, and then there's a light in the fridge, which is also there. And then you say, no, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put, the minute I open the fridge, you know, it starts playing my favorite FM music. Okay. And when I put it off, it goes off. You will not, because it's obvious. You have one thing, you're just putting a thing. It is not the, what do you call, the valley of invention is not crossed. It is the next obvious step. Suppose, let's say, 10,000 years, you discovered the wheel. Okay. And you invented the wheel and you said, God, it rolls so fast. And you go to the patent officer and he gives you a patent. Yes, you have invented the wheel. This is your patent. Tomorrow, someone goes and puts 2 wheels and says, okay, I put a thing. Can I get a patent? The patent, now this is obvious. You have 1 wheel, you put 2 wheels and you put it becomes a cart. I'm not going to give you a patent because it's the next obvious step. Next day, someone goes with 4 wheels. Again, he says, this is obvious. You have 1 wheel, you put 4 wheels, it doesn't make a difference. After a year, someone goes and says, okay, I have 4 wheels. Now I've put an industrial internal combustion engine. I connect it to a chassis, and I then have a rotor that conducts to the IC engine in which diesel or petrol is put. It burns it and it gives power to the engines. The patent officer said, definitely you get a patent for this, because even though you've used the wheel, it is no longer the next obvious step. Hello?
Hello.
Yeah,
Sir.
here I'm hearing some background.
Yes, I can hear you, sir.
Okay, so that is the patent. It's a very important thing. We will not have time to go deep into patenting. It's a subject in itself. Okay, so the important things you have to remember, it's non-obvious, beneficial. Could someone off the mute their mic?
Someone's mic is on.
Seems to be extremely.
Sir, Nora Nissan, kindly mute. Nora Nissan.
Okay, I think that's better. Okay, so this is patenting and how the patenting process, it's a subject in itself. This music seems to be very irritating. Okay, so we have both product and process patents. Both the final product as well as the process can be done. Okay. Okay, so patent examples. Okay. In India, there are a lot of things that cannot be patented. I'm going into these things. Works of authorship cannot be done because that comes under copyright. Method of doing business is not allowed in India. Don't you have option to just mute her directly, the host?
Aparna, kindly mute.
I think that's okay. Okay, so these are the things that cannot be patented. Inventions which do not have a working model. laws of nature, all of these are things that cannot be patented. Okay, I'm going to rush through this. Traditional knowledge cannot be patented in India. So that diagnostic ways to save people, therapeutic methods cannot be patented. Medicines can be done, but a new way of doing bypass surgery cannot be patented in India. In some countries, it's allowed. Plants, animals, we allow modified microbes in which there is increased production of a product, that is allowed. But whole animals such as the onco mouse, things like that, genetically modified animals per se cannot be done. Microbes that allowed in increased production are now allowed. So if you have a microbe that allows for more production of, let's say, ethanol, you would get a patent. Okay. Products harmful to society, not allowed in India. A method of cheating in an exam against moral good is also not allowed in India. So while the TRIPS follows basic guidelines across the world, that is 20 years, things like that, detailed guidelines are dependent on that country. Okay. So while it would say 20 years has to be the patent, the three criteria, novelty, non-obviousness, and industrial applicability, all this is compulsory across all countries. Smaller things like such as, products harmful to society against smaller, those can be country specific. So India has a lot of country specific things. Ways of doing surgery or diagnostic methods for surgery are not allowed in India. It's allowed in the US. Okay. Okay. I think the fourth or fifth one is trade secrets. A trade secret is something that cannot be revealed. Okay. But in which you will not get a patent because the technical value of that is not that important. So it could be something like KFC chicken. Kentucky Fried Chicken has a trade secret for the mix of its blends of spices that gives it that specific taste. Okay, it comes under a trade secret, and people who work don't know what it is, even though you have Asian fried chicken, Korean fried chicken, Kottayam fried chicken, so and all, which all taste very similar. But the specific one is a trade secret that, unlike a patent, goes on. There is no time limit for a trade secret, but the difference from a patent, the added gain or scientific knowledge in that is not too much. Okay. So, or like Coca-Cola, the trade secret of Coca-Cola is something that it's not a technical, innovation in such, but it is something that involves something that has been passed on for centuries, or something that gives it a specific taste that adds to its value. Okay. But technically it is not something that is innovative. Okay. So it is kept confidential. You give it to the government, but the government does not release it, unlike a patent where it is released to the government and then the government decides to release it after on publication, and everyone has access to the information. Okay, I think just two more and then we will go. One is copyright. Now, copyright is something that covers music, books, paintings, photographs. All of these come in copyright. And copyright, what happened is it has a much longer term, because writers from the time of Victor Hugo said that, see, all of us as parents, we not only make for ourselves, but we also make for our children or the next generation. So copyrights is usually given 60 years from the date of the death of the author. Okay. So that not only after the author dies, so you see Michael Jackson is still among the top 20 artists from amount of money they get, even though he's dead. Or Elvis Presley died in 1977. His estate keeps making money because it's not 60 years since he's dead. So it goes on. Okay. Okay. This is the symbol for copyright. Software codes come under copyright. Okay. So programs, things do not come under patent, but they come under copyright. Okay. So 60 years from the beginning. All of these are various copyrights for books, artistic work, and so on. Okay. Okay, I think there is one more, integrated circuit design, which is the last one. The seventh one is integrated circuit design, which looks, the copyright, the IPR for that is based on silicon IC circuit. So, if you have a IC circuit for, let's say, a telephone, for a phone or a TV, you can get a integrated circuit design, because the way this becomes small, the way it is arranged, there is a certain value in that. I see chip makers, now you hear there is a shortage of chips around the world. So there's a value for, IC circuits, and that also forms under IPR. Okay. I think I have more or less covered. Let me just look. I should have your syllabus somewhere here. Just get your syllabus. Any questions? I'm just taking up your syllabus. Just give me a minute. So yeah, IPR, Introduction to Property and Intellectual Concept of Property, Knowledge Economy, Corporal and Non-Corporal Property, Tangible and Intangible, the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, Forms of Intellectual Property, World Trade Organization. Then you have copyright, which is one module, types of copyright, trademarks, then patenting, industrial design, semiconductor chip protection, which was, I was saying, the IC circuit, geographical indicators, okay, there's trade secrets, legal frameworks, and last one is plant varieties protection, which I've not covered. India has something known as the PPVFR, okay, protection of plant varieties and farmers' rights, okay, which is something that we get. I'm just discussing it because it's part of your syllabus. It's not under the 7 IPRs of TRIPS. So once TRIPS formulated these 7 IPRs, there's another IPR which fell onto the state of, let's say, plants. So a lot of countries, they have things, you may have heard of terminology such as terminator seeds, or terminator seeds in which the seeds, once it makes that plant, it dies. So you cannot take it to the next generation. In India, we have something known as seed saving capacity, or farmers here, they keep 10% of the seeds so they can use it in the next year. Okay. So after the 7 IPRs, the US wanted something known as the UPOV, which was, it's a French word meaning Union pour aux Vegetables, which means a treaty for controlling vegetables or plants. Okay, and this treaty was very much in favor of giant corporations like Monsanto and helped them. So India and other countries, a lot of developing countries said, see, we cannot follow the UPOV. The option of protecting our plants and our farmers should not be in the 7 types of TRIPS mandated IPR. We are going to have our own thing. And so the WTO said, for regarding plants and protection of plants, each country can choose what they want. A lot of countries went for the standard one, which is the UPOV. India was one of the few countries that developed a very, very good agreement known as the PPVFR, protection of plant varieties and farmers' rights. The word farmers' rights means there is an emphasis on protecting the rights of the farmer to use their seeds over and over again. And India has a very good act for that. Okay, so even though it comes under an IPR, it is not a TRIPS mandated IPR. India has its own act as compared to other countries. Okay, and that is why things such as BT cotton, things like that are more difficult to implement in India, because we look at the rights of the farmer. So plants also have the using of better modes of plants, paddy, things like that, come under an IPR. Could be breeders' rights, things like that. But in India, we do not follow the global thing of UPOV, but have our own act. Okay. So that's about it for your syllabus. The last 5 minutes. Any questions? Any doubts? Nothing? Amazing. Must be about 65 people and not a single one of you all have a question. One of the things I notice, and it's across both here because I take classes in Kerala, I've taken classes both in London and US. And I noticed the biggest difference is Malayali students tend to be extremely quiet. I don't know if it's a reverence for your teacher or a sign of, not bothered, but it's something that you have to stop. A difference is there when you go to, let's say, I take a class in Manipal or I take a class in Vellore. There's a little more questioning. Okay. But when you go abroad and you try to give it, everyone has a question which shows that they are engaged and that they've learned something. And teachers are not prone to saying, yes, I don't know, let's look it up later. It's something that you need to build up. If you have a question, ask it to show that, you found something out of it. So being quiet doesn't make you respectful to the teacher. Okay. So if you have questions, ask. Anything else? Otherwise, I think we can stop.
If you don't have any doubts, let us wind up this session.
Yeah, we can do that.
Lakshmi?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, for this wonderful class. The class was really informative as well as interesting. You made so many examples. The topic was completely, we didn't know nothing about it. It was completely new for us. And you tried your maximum. You gave us so many information. So thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Now I welcome Sandra Benny from 2nd DC Mathematics for the vote of.
Every day is a chance to begin again. Don't focus on failures of yesterday. Start today with positive thoughts and expectations. So, with a good positive smile, I wish you all a very good afternoon. Respected Principal Dr. Sister Asha Therese, our resource person, Dr. Leon Itichan, and all the dignitaries and participants present out here. It is such an honor for me to get the opportunity to thank you all. Firstly, I would like to give a special thanks to Dr. Sister Asha Therese, Principal of St. Joseph's College, Irinjalakuda, even in her absence, for providing immense support and to make this a great success. Next, I would like to thank our Vice Principal, Dr. Sister Blessy and Sister Eliza for supporting and guiding us throughout. And now I extend my gratitude to our Honorable Resource Person, Dr. Leon Itichan, Professor in Biotechnology at Sahridaya College, to take out his time from his busy schedule to grace this event. Thank you, sir, for making us more aware on the rights given to the persons over the creations of their own minds. So thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Next, I would like to thank Alfie ma'am, who always led, supported, and coordinated us to make this a successful webinar. So thank you, ma'am. And I must thank the organizing team and those who worked hard in the past few days to make this a successful one. So thank you all. Last but not least, I must thank and congratulate all the participants for their active participation. So thank you everyone once again for making it a great success. Thank you and have a great day ahead.
Thank you, everyone.